What if Pharaoh was not the true architect of rebellion, but merely a king being steered into arrogance? What if behind the throne, in the shadows of power, stood a man whose whispers didn't just advise, but shaped tyranny itself? History remembers Pharaoh, but it barely speaks of Hāmān, a name mentioned beside a king, yet hidden behind his shadow. And that silence? It's dangerous, because when you ignore the voice behind power, you miss how corruption truly spreads. If you want more deep, powerful Islamic stories like this, subscribe now and drop a comment saying, "Truth," because what you're about to hear is rarely told. This is not just history, this is a warning. And it starts with a whisper. Pharaoh didn't wake up one day claiming, "I am your Lord, Most High." No, arrogance doesn't begin with a declaration. It begins with influence. And every tyrant has someone who feeds it. Enter Hāmān, not just a minister, not just an advisor, but a man who understood something dangerous. Power is not controlled by the one who sits on the throne, but by the one who controls what that person believes. And Hāmān mastered belief. He didn't challenge Pharaoh. He validated him. He didn't oppose his ego. He expanded it. Every doubt Pharaoh had, Hāmān erased it. Every hesitation, he replaced it with certainty. You are right. You are powerful. You are above them. And slowly, the king stopped questioning himself. That's the first shift. Because when a leader loses the ability to doubt, he becomes uncontrollable. But here's where it gets darker. When Prophet Musa, alayhi salam, came with truth, Pharaoh didn't just reject it. He felt threatened. Truth has a way of exposing illusion. And illusion is what Hāmān had carefully built. So, what did Hāmān do? Did he tell Pharaoh to reconsider? To reflect? To seek guidance? No. He escalated the rebellion. He suggested something bold, something symbolic, something terrifying. "Build me a tower," Pharaoh said. But it wasn't just Pharaoh speaking. It was influence speaking. It was Hāmān turning arrogance into action. A tower not to reach the sky, but to mock the very idea of Allah's authority. Think about that. This wasn't just disbelief. This was engineered defiance. And here's the truth most people miss. Hāmān didn't need to be king, because influence is more powerful than position. Kings rise and fall, but influence, it spreads quietly, strategically, and often invisibly. That's why the Qur'an pairs their names together, Pharaoh and Hāmān, not separately, because tyranny is never a solo act. It's a collaboration between power and the voices that guide it. So ask yourself, if Pharaoh represents visible arrogance, then what does Hāmān represent in your world? The voices that inflate ego? The influences that normalize wrong? The quiet whispers that make falsehood feel right? Because not every Hāmān stands beside a throne. Some sit in conversations, in media, in circles of influence. And if you're not aware of them, you might already be listening. And that's the real warning. Tyranny doesn't begin with power. It begins with influence. And sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is not the one in front, but the one behind. Egypt stood at the peak of human power. Not just a kingdom, but a machine. The Nile flowed like a controlled lifeline. Cities rose with precision. Armies moved with discipline. Wealth poured in from every direction. Gold, grain, slaves, authority. Everything obeyed. And at the center of it all stood one man, Pharaoh. At first, he was just a ruler, strategic, calculated, respected. But power doesn't stay neutral. Give a man control over land, and he feels important. Give him control over people, and he feels superior. But give him control over everything, and something dangerous begins to grow. Because absolute power doesn't just change actions, it rewires belief. Pharaoh didn't suddenly wake up claiming divinity. No, this was a slow transformation, a quiet shift. At first, he demanded obedience, then loyalty, then submission, until one day, obedience wasn't enough. He didn't just want to be followed, he wanted to be worshipped. "I am your Lord, Most High." That statement didn't come from strength. It came from unchecked power, mixed with something even more dangerous: isolation. Because when no one challenges you, your thoughts go untested. When no one corrects you, your errors feel like truth. And when everyone around you says, "You're right," you stop asking if you're wrong. That's the psychology of tyranny. It doesn't begin with evil intent. It begins with no resistance. And Pharaoh had none. Every command he gave was carried out. Every word was echoed back as truth. Every doubt silently erased. So his identity began to shift, not from man to king, but from king to something beyond accountability, something untouchable, something unquestioned. And that's where the real danger begins. Because when a human believes he answers to no one, he becomes capable of anything. Oppression becomes policy. Cruelty becomes normal. And truth becomes a threat. But here's the part history often skips. Pharaoh didn't build this mindset alone. No one reaches that level of delusion in isolation. Because even arrogance needs reinforcement. Even false belief needs support. Behind the public declarations, behind the throne, behind the image of absolute authority, there are always voices. Quiet ones, strategic ones, voices that don't command, but shape. And while the world saw Pharaoh rising, something else was rising with him. Not beside him, not above him, but just close enough to guide him, to affirm him, to push him one step further, every time. Because power doesn't just need control, it needs direction. And behind every ruler is influence. Enter Hāmān, not with a crown, not with a throne, not with an army, but with something far more dangerous: access. He was the chief advisor, the strategist, the man who stood close enough to power to shape it, because Hāmān didn't need to be seen. He needed to be heard, and more importantly, believed. While others served Pharaoh, Hāmān guided him. While others obeyed commands, Hāmān influenced decisions. That's the difference most people miss. Power is loud. Influence is quiet. And quiet control lasts longer. At first glance, Hāmān looked loyal. He didn't challenge Pharaoh. He didn't compete with him. He didn't try to take his place. Instead, he did something far more effective. He reinforced him. Every idea Pharaoh had, Hāmān sharpened it. Every ego-driven thought, he validated it. Every moment of doubt, he erased it before it could grow. You're right. You deserve this. No one is above you. And slowly, Pharaoh stopped thinking critically. Because when someone constantly agrees with you, you stop searching for truth. You start expecting confirmation. That's how deception works. Not by forcing lies, but by making lies feel like truth, you arrived at yourself. But here's where it becomes dangerous. Hāmān was not ignorant. He was intelligent, calculated, aware. And that's what makes his role more terrifying. Because ignorance can be corrected. But intelligence, used in the service of falsehood, that's deliberate. That's chosen. Hāmān saw the direction Pharaoh was going. He saw the arrogance rising. He saw the claims of divinity forming. And he didn't stop it. He didn't question it. He accelerated it. Because for Hāmān, Pharaoh's rebellion was not a problem. It was an opportunity. The higher Pharaoh rose, the closer Hāmān stood to power. And proximity to power can corrupt just as deeply as power itself. Think about that. A man who knows the truth, but chooses influence over integrity. A man who understands consequences, but prioritizes position. That's not weakness. That's strategy. And that strategy reshaped an entire empire. Because once Pharaoh began to believe he was untouchable, there was no limit left, no boundary, no restraint. And every time he crossed a line, Hāmān was there, not to pull him back, but to push him further. This is where the real lesson begins. Because not every tyrant creates himself. Some are constructed, piece by piece, word by word, validation by validation. And behind that construction is always someone who knows exactly what they're doing, someone who understands human psychology and uses it to build illusion. Hāmān didn't just obey Pharaoh, he amplified him. He took arrogance and turned it into ideology. He took power and turned it into delusion. He took a ruler and helped him believe he was a god. So the question is no longer about Pharaoh, it's about influence, because throughout history, the most dangerous people were not always the ones in front, but the ones behind. Power alone didn't make Pharaoh claim divinity. Power gave him the opportunity, but it was influence that gave him the belief. And that influence had a name: Hāmān. Pharaoh didn't begin as a man who saw himself as a god. He became that slowly, carefully, word by word, because even arrogance needs construction. Even delusion needs reinforcement. And Hāmān understood that better than anyone. He didn't rush it. He didn't force it. He fed it. A suggestion here, a confirmation there, a quiet agreement at just the right moment. When Pharaoh hesitated, Hāmān removed the hesitation. When Pharaoh questioned, Hāmān replaced the question with certainty. You are not like them. You are above them. You deserve more. And the most dangerous one, no one can challenge you. That's how doubt disappears. Not by answering it, but by drowning it. Because doubt, if left alone, can lead to truth. But if constantly silenced, it turns into conviction. False conviction, unquestioned belief. And here's the psychological trap. The human mind doesn't just believe what it hears once. It believes what it hears repeatedly, especially when it comes from someone trusted, someone close, someone who never contradicts. So every time Pharaoh heard those affirmations, they didn't feel like influence anymore. They felt like his own thoughts. That's the illusion. That's how manipulation becomes identity. And once belief settles in, behavior follows. Pharaoh stopped acting like a ruler and started acting like something more. He demanded not just obedience, but submission. Not just loyalty, but devotion. Until the line between leadership and divinity completely disappeared. I am your Lord, Most High. That statement didn't come from nowhere. It was built, layer by layer, voice by voice, whisper by whisper. And Hāmān was there for every step. Not in front, not making declarations, but behind the scenes, shaping the outcome. Because influence doesn't need attention. It needs consistency. It needs repetition. It needs proximity. And Hāmān had all three. But here's the part that should make you pause. At any moment, this could have been stopped. One honest word, one moment of truth, one voice saying, "No, you're wrong. You are human." But that voice never came, because the one man who could have said it chose not to. When intelligent people support falsehood, it doesn't just survive, it expands. When bad counsel surrounds power, it doesn't stay advice. It becomes destiny, because eventually, the person in power stops hearing anything else. And once that happens, there is no turning back. So Pharaoh didn't just become a tyrant, he was constructed into one, guided into it, reinforced into it, until there was nothing left to question, nothing left to resist, only a belief that felt absolute. And then, everything was challenged, because truth has a way of arriving. At the exact moment, illusion feels strongest. And when it does, it doesn't whisper, it confronts. Whispering, truth doesn't arrive quietly. It enters and exposes everything. And in the heart of Pharaoh's empire, where power felt absolute, where control felt permanent, truth walked in through a man. Musa, alayhi salam. Not with an army, not with wealth, but with something far more dangerous to a system built on illusion. Clarity. He spoke of one God, one authority above all, one truth that no king could rewrite. And, for the first time, Pharaoh heard something he could not control. Something that didn't bow, didn't negotiate, didn't fear him. And here's what most people overlook. Pharaoh hesitated, just for a moment. a crack in certainty, a flicker of doubt. Because when truth is presented clearly, even the most powerful mind feels it. Even a tyrant recognizes something real. But hesitation is fragile, and that's where influence steps in. Enter Hāmān, not with fear, not with caution, but with urgency. Where Musa, alayhi salam, called for reflection, Hāmān called for reaction. Where truth invited thought, Hāmān pushed confrontation. Because reflection slows power down, but confrontation, it protects it. Pharaoh didn't need time to think. He needed to be reminded who he was, or at least, who he believed he was. So Hāmān reframed the moment. This wasn't a call to truth. It was a challenge to authority. This wasn't guidance. It was threat. And once that narrative took hold, Pharaoh's hesitation disappeared, replaced by something louder, something more familiar. Ego. And then came the demand. Not just rejection, not just denial, but mockery. Build me a tower, a structure meant to reach the sky, to look upon the God of Musa. But this wasn't curiosity. This was calculated defiance. A public display, a statement to the people. There is nothing above me, nothing beyond my reach, nothing I cannot challenge. And behind that statement was strategy, because Hāmān understood something critical. When truth threatens power, you don't just deny it. You discredit it. You turn it into spectacle. You make it look absurd, so people stop taking it seriously. That tower, it wasn't about reaching the heavens. It was about lowering the truth. This is how systems of control survive. Not by destroying truth directly, but by reshaping how people perceive it. And Hāmān mastered that. He didn't silence Musa, alayhi salam. He made Pharaoh louder. He turned a moment of reflection into a moment of rebellion. Because Hāmān didn't just support disbelief. He engineered it. Step by step, word by word, reaction by reaction, until Pharaoh no longer needed convincing. He became the message himself. And that's the shift. The moment where denial becomes identity, where arrogance becomes policy, where opposition to truth becomes a mission. So when Musa, alayhi salam, stood with clarity, he wasn't just facing a man, he was facing a system built on influence, on reinforcement, on carefully constructed illusion. And systems like that don't fall easily because they are protected, not just by power, but by people who refuse to let truth be heard. Collapse doesn't begin with destruction. It begins with warnings, clear, repeated, undeniable, signs that shake certainty if someone is willing to see them. And they came one after another, moments that disrupted control, events that couldn't be explained away, each one carrying the same message: you are not in charge. But arrogance has a defense mechanism. It doesn't process truth. It resists it, because accepting truth would mean admitting error. And for someone who believes he is above all, that's the one thing he cannot afford. So Pharaoh doubled down, not because he was certain, but because he was afraid to be wrong. That's the shift. When confidence turns into desperation, when authority turns into panic, and suddenly, every new sign doesn't invite reflection. It threatens identity. And in that pressure, voices matter more than ever. Because when reality starts breaking illusion, a single honest voice could still change everything. But that voice never came, because Hāmān was still there, still reinforcing, still affirming, still pushing forward, as if nothing had changed. Think about that. Clear signs, escalating consequences, moments that should have forced a pause. And yet, Hāmān didn't step back. He stepped in, stronger, more certain, more committed to the narrative they had built. Because at this point, it wasn't just Pharaoh's belief on the line, it was his own. If Pharaoh fell, the entire structure collapsed. The influence, the position, the power, everything. So instead of correcting course, he reinforced the mistake. Again, and again, and again. This is how downfall accelerates. Not when truth is absent, but when truth is rejected repeatedly. Because every rejection raises the stakes. Every denial makes the fall steeper. And eventually, there's no safe way down. Pharaoh's control began to crack. Not publicly at first, but internally. Decisions became reactive, aggressive, unstable, because deep down, he knew. But knowing isn't enough. If you refuse to act on it, and then came the final moment, not a warning, not a sign, but a consequence, the sea. A path opened, then closed, and everything that once looked unshakable vanished. Power, army, authority, gone. In that moment, there was no advisor, no reinforcement, no echo of validation, just reality. Clear, unavoidable, final. And that's the part most people miss. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was built, just like the arrogance was built. Decision by decision, voice by voice, influence by influence. Because when influence is corrupt, it doesn't just misguide. It locks you in. It removes exits. It silences doubt, until the only path left is forward, even if forward leads to destruction. Pharaoh didn't fall because he lacked power. He fell because he lacked correction. And Hāmān? He didn't just witness the collapse. He helped make it inevitable. That's the warning. Because the most dangerous path is not being wrong. It's being wrong, surrounded by people who tell you you're right. And by the time reality proves otherwise, it's already too late. Stories like this are not preserved for entertainment. They are preserved for recognition. Because what happened between Pharaoh and Hāmān didn't end in history. It evolved. Not everyone who advises you wants truth. Some want comfort. Some want access. Some want proximity to your power, no matter how small that power is. And the easiest way to stay close to someone? Tell them what they want to hear. That's the trap. Because the most dangerous people in your life are not the ones who oppose you. They're the ones who approve of everything you do, even when you're wrong. Especially when you're wrong. Think about it. Correction feels uncomfortable. Truth can challenge you. It can slow you down, force you to reflect. But validation? Validation feels good. It feels smooth. It feels right. Even when it's leading you somewhere dangerous. That's how influence works today. It doesn't announce itself. It blends in. It sounds like support. It looks like loyalty. But behind it, it's shaping your decisions, your beliefs, your identity. And just like Pharaoh, no one starts off completely lost. It happens gradually. You listen to one voice, then another. Then you start filtering out anything that disagrees with you, until eventually, you're surrounded by people who echo you, not challenge you. That's when growth stops. That's when mistakes multiply. That's when small errors become permanent direction. Hāmān's legacy isn't a person anymore. It's a pattern, a mindset, a role that can be played by anyone. A friend, a mentor, a circle, even content you consume daily. Anything that consistently feeds your ego, without questioning your direction. So the question is no longer about history. It's about you, right now. Who is shaping your thinking? Who is influencing your decisions? Who is reinforcing your beliefs? And more importantly, who is correcting you? Because if no one is correcting you, you should be concerned. If no one is challenging you, you should pause. If every voice around you agrees with you, you should question everything. Growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from friction, from truth, from people who are willing to risk your approval, to protect your direction. That's the difference between guidance and manipulation. One pushes you toward truth, the other pulls you deeper into illusion. And the scariest part? Both can sound the same, at first. So don't just look for support. Look for honesty. Don't just value agreement. Value correction. Because the wrong influence won't destroy you immediately. It will build you into something you don't even recognize. If this story changed how you see influence and leadership, subscribe and share this with someone who needs it. And comment, "Awake," if you understand the warning. Because awareness might be the only thing standing between you and becoming the next example.